Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Higher Education Debate of 2015. For those who don't know me, I'm John Gill. I'm editor of Times Higher Education, and we're absolutely delighted to be hosting the event this evening with our partners, Universities UK, the Open University, and of course, HEPI. I'd like to start this evening, if I could, just by saying a big thank you to our three brave panellists who have entered the bear pit this evening, as I think Church House is known on nights like this. It's very kind of you to be with us, and I'd also like to extend a special thank you to Ed Miliband for timing the tuition fee announcement, especially for our debate. It was very kind of him. And last but not least, thanks to all of you for being here, and I know you're all ready to unleash your inner Paxman when we get to the Q&A very shortly. Please do stick your hand up and ask questions, and do remember as well that if you'd like to, you can also put questions to the panelists using the Twitter hashtag #HeHustings. We'll have a reporter in the room who will pick some of those up and put them to the panel as we go. Now, in a moment, we'll hand over to our chair, who I saw on Twitter had promised to be a tough chair this evening, which I like the sound of. But before that, we'll just have a few words from Nicola Dandridge, CEO of Universities UK. Nicola.
Thank you very much, John. And can I also extend a very warm welcome from the UK to all of you this evening, and also many thanks to our panellists. This debate is certainly very well timed in what looks as if it's going to be the closest election for decades. Universities and their role and their relationship with, for instance, immigration, business, of course, funding, looks set to be absolutely centre stage in the debates that run up to the election. And universities are so often at the heart of all these issues, precisely because of the central role that they play in our society. They really do matter. And therefore, what politicians say about them really does matter, which is why we are so pleased to be having this debate this evening, hosted by four partners: Times Higher, HEPI, the Open University, and Universities UK. And we're absolutely delighted that so many people have turned up this evening to hear our guests. I am very pleased at this stage to be handing over to our chair for this event, Baroness Lane-Fox of Soho, otherwise known as Martha Lane-Fox. Martha. Martha has built her career, as you will know, around the digital world, coming to the public's attention as one of the founders of the pioneering website lastminute.com. And she has channeled her passion for using technology and for connecting people in her role as the government's UK digital champion, and set up her own charity as well to help plug the digital skills gap. She's a non-executive board member of Channel 4 and Marks & Spencer's, as well as a patron for the human rights charity Reprieve. Martha is also the youngest woman to have taken a seat on the red benches of the House of Lords.
That's out of date.
I suspect also...
That's out of date now. I feel terrible.
Is that right? And also, as Chancellor of the Open University, I suspect I'm on fairly safe ground to say that you're probably the youngest Chancellor as well. But in any event, we are absolutely delighted, Martha, that you're chairing this evening's event. Thank you very much, and I hand over to Martha.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. You may all be under the impression that this is about the election, but I'd like to tell you that this is actually my audition for question time. I am putting myself forward as the next and least discovered member of the Dimbleby family, so you can judge me at the end of the evening about whether I've got a hope in hell of pushing one of those Dimblebys off any questions or question time slot. It's fantastic to be here. I haven't been Chancellor of the Open University for very long. I am an enormous, enormous believer in the central mission to open up education to everyone that institution has had right from its early days, and it's fantastic to be able to open up this evening to so many people in the room. We're also going to try and capture some of the comments on the web as well. I have been given a good little briefing about each of our panellists, which seems to centre on their own education predominantly, which I feel is somewhat mean, as they probably have moved on a little bit since they were all in higher education. But I'll just give you a quick rundown in case you wondered. We're going to start with Greg at the end, on my left, but more suitably on your right, I think. Greg is the Tory Minister for State for Universities and Science and Cities, and hasn't been in post very long. Not that that means we're going to forgive you much, Greg, this evening, I'm afraid. And he's the MP for Tunbridge Wells, which you have been for longer, since 2005. Greg was born in Middlesbrough, and this is the key bit, attended South Bank St Peter's Roman Catholic School, and went on to read economics at Magdalen College, Cambridge. And the interesting fact, certainly for all of my OU colleagues in the room, is that you used to be an OU tutor. Very glad to hear that. Have you got any pupils in the room, do you think? Not sure. And then moving on, we're going to come this side. We have Julian Huppert, who's the MP for Cambridge, for the Liberal Democrats, where you were MP at the age of 22. Is that right? No. Oh, not right.
I was only elected in 2010.
that's
I was a
misinformation.
At 22.
Oh, you were a councillor at 22.
Yeah.
Okay, well then we can definitely go head-to-head on the youngest prizes there, can't we? And Julian has had a hugely varied career as a scientist, among many things, and would like you to know that he used to collect virgin female fruit flies for your research. I'm not sure if that's going to be directly relevant. Perhaps more importantly, studied computational biology at Clare College, and then found your own biotechnology company.
That was the virgin fruit flies.
That was the virgin fruit flies, got it. I didn't think you'd be covering that this evening, did you? And finally, Liam, sitting next to me here, Liam Byrne MP, who's the Shadow Minister for Universities, Skills and Science, as you know, went to school in Harlow, Essex, and then went to Manchester University, got first-class honours degree in what, Liam?
Politics and modern history.
Politics and modern history, there we go. Didn't tell me that. And as you know, Liam's worked across lots of different bits of government and for Gordon Brown and as the Cabinet Chief Secretary as well. And your interesting fact is that you've always been an advocate of the graduate tax, it tells me here, which I think we might well be coming back to, but I shall leave that over to you. Right, now on your seats, you are maybe sitting on 3 pieces of coloured card, and we're going to do a quick bit of interactivity to kick off. I'd like you to wave in the air the appropriate coloured card for, first of all, who on this stage do you think has the best higher education policies? So wave in the air. But yeah, wave, come on, don't be shy. We've got some cards going up. We need some more. That's it. Quite evenly split. Oh dear. I've been told that I have to call this, which is looking quite tough. I have to say that I am very, very hard pushed to call that. I don't know whether my fellow panelists would think that that was unfair. It looked like a pretty mixed bag of people. So now, if you're pretty split at this point in the evening, what about who you think will win the election? Oof, I like that. Coalition. We've got a few coalitions. Very good. Okay. Well, again, pretty split with a heavy dose of coalitions. I'm very imaginative thinking there with your cards. Well done. Well, that's not very indicative unless we come back with a slamming result in the other direction at the end of the evening when we're going to test it as well. Now, that's really quite enough from me. This is about you and giving you maximum opportunity to ask questions and to really put these guys on their mettle. So please be tough. I do have a stick and I am prepared to use it. If you think I should, start waving at me. And we're going to group the questions in chunks of 4 subjects. And the first subject we're going to address is tuition fees and funding. Then we're going to do immigration and the effects on international students and staff. Then research, and then finally, access and social mobility. So those are the areas. We're going to start then with tuition fees and funding. Obviously, this is going to be the least controversial and the quickest round of questions. I'm going to take groups of questions all on that subject, probably 3 or 4 in one go, and then we'll ask each of the panelists to respond. So please wave in the air. Now is your chance. This is your moment to really hear it from, I'm not going to say the horse's mouth, that's very rude, but please stick your hand in the air if you have a question about the tuition fees and funding.
Wow.
Nothing?
Nothing.
Come on. One brave gentleman. We've got a couple over here. Do you want to offer a mic here? Come on this side. Nothing, surely.
Yes, in the autumn statement, the Chancellor announced postgraduate loans would be extended to people under the age of 30. Why should they not be extended to people over that age?
Okay, great question. Only just over 30 myself, but a great question. Next person. We had someone in front. Yes? Gentleman at the front.
Dave Phoenix, London South Bank University. I'm just wondering if the candidates could tell us a little bit about what the implications they would see for their fees policy on the student cap, number cap.
Here we go. There's some bravery in this side of the room now. Two ladies here, please. Excuse me, no, over here. So the lady on the end in the red jacket, and then a lady at the front. Do you want to go with the red jacket?
Oh, me first?
Yes,
right.
sorry.
Okay, thanks. Pam Tatlow from the University think tank Million Plus. If people on the panel don't support lowering fees, will they tell us what fee cap they would support during the lifetime of the next Parliament?
Thank you. And then the lady at the front.
Naomi Weir from the Campaign for Science and Engineering. A question around, regardless of how you would fund universities with tuition fees or otherwise perhaps, if you consider it important, how would you ensure that the fee and perhaps government additional contribution would meet the cost of a high quality higher education at undergraduate level?
Great. Right, we're going to start with those questions, and then if we've got some more hands flying up, we'll take some more afterwards. Julian, I'm going to throw you in the mix first.
You want me to do all of those?
Yeah, a selection will all would be great if you can come
I mean, firstly, to pick up the one about postgraduate loans. I mean, this is something I was really delighted to see. It's something I'd been campaigning for quite a long time. It's something we as a party had pushed for. Because there is a huge problem that, although nobody pays undergraduate fees while they're studying, we'll come later to what happens afterwards, but people were expected to pay up front for postgraduate. And that was really hitting social mobility because people either had to borrow from a bank or from parents, typically. So I did quite a lot of work with NUS and all sorts of others to argue the case for these income contingent loans for graduate funding. And we got the first tranche of that in the autumn statement, as you say. The reason I suspect why it's under 30 is because otherwise, the later it is, the less time there is to pay it back as an income contingent amount. To me, though, that should only be a first step. Because I think we do want to encourage people to do master's degrees, all sorts of postgraduate degrees later on in life. It's a brilliant way to retrain. So we should then, assuming it all works well, expand the programme. You'll have to think very carefully about how to make it income contingent, because obviously if a 60-year-old does a master's and you give them 30 years to pay it back, you'll get much less paid back than a 30-year-old doing it. So you may have to find a way to adjust the repayment process. But the principle should apply to people of any age if we can make sure how to get it to work, because that will help to get people in. The issue about the fee cap. I mean, the fee cap I would like to see is zero. I've always believed that we should fund higher education in a different way. We should fully fund it. I was a student when Labour promised not to introduce them and then introduced them, promised never to triple them, then triple them, and so forth. That's what I'd like to do. But I simply don't know how to get the funding for that because I would not do so if it meant destroying the quality of the education, the question we're coming on to later. So the question is, if you can't achieve that, what should you do with money? And I'm pleased that Labour have decided to put some money towards helping young people. I think, however, they've got the focus the wrong way round. When I talk to student unions around the country, when I talk to students through Cambridge, the thing they all talk about is the cost of living when they're a student. That's the thing that money should go into. It was summed up very nicely to me very recently by a senior student union officer, I promise I wouldn't say who, which was that the Labour announcement was great for a headline, but not if you actually want to help students. So what I would suggest you do with the money that you can liberate to help students is to put money towards the cost of living, towards bursaries, whether it's grants or loans, depending on income background. That is the thing which will get rid of the barriers students actually face, that student after student tells you is the problem, rather than on something which only helps if you end up earning a very large amount of money. That, to me, is not the right thing to do. Yeah, I mean, I heard your question. I've given you the answer. In terms of the numbers, I realise you don't agree with my opinion on what the fee cap should be.
So you're saying there should be no fee cap? There should be no fee?
I would ideally I would ideally like to get to 0, but I cannot see...
No, what fee cap would you support if you don't support lowering fees? Would you support a lifting of the fee cap?
No,
yes or no?
No, certainly we shouldn't increase it, if that's your question.
In which
Absolutely
case,
not.
how will universities be funded?
Well, universities are currently funded. You know, I'm afraid, you know, but the money that is available, I would not use it preferentially to help people, students who will go on to make lots of money. I would use it to help students at the time they say they need help. To ensure we meet the costs, I think that comes down to what we've just been saying. You have to make sure that it is properly funded, which is why what I wouldn't do either is just sort of cut the fees to get a headline, unless you can find that money. So you have to make sure there is good quality to support. And part of that is about looking at the numbers of people who are doing HE. And I think one of the things which this government has done really well is to support further education and apprenticeships. And I think that is something which we should be encouraging more people to do, with well-funded courses there, because I think it's much better for many people. That's what they would want to do.
And a question on the quality? Did you want to?
Sorry.
You feel like answer that? Okay.
Am I not hearing the right questions?
Okay.
Yeah, so you have to make sure that it's a high-quality education, absolutely. So did I miss part of the question?
Did that answer your question?
Decreasing as inflation affects both the fee cap as it is at the moment and government contribution. Inevitably then the amount of money available to universities to fund courses is going down.
Right.
So quality obviously was the question around there.
So, I mean, I think quality isn't exactly the same thing as the funding level, and so you do need to do both. But in terms of the funding level, I think we will just have to look at what money do we provide centrally? How much do we put in? And I think there is a very, very strong case for the state to put money into higher education. The benefits accrue so heavily to the state as well as elsewhere that we should be making sure we have the money so people come out with a good quality education, whether it's an apprenticeship, whether it's an initial degree, whether it's postgraduate study.
So, Liam. Sorry, just say it again with the mic so we can hear.
So the question regarding whether or not you'd support the current position where there's no student number control, so whoever is able to benefit can benefit by going to university.
I want to make sure that we have the right education available for people, whatever it is that they want to do. I suspect that if we can increase the number and quality of good apprenticeships, we will find that there are more people who wish to do that sort of thing, and you won't find the same demand that's been projected for HE. We'll have to see how that works out. So I wouldn't make any particular changes to the capping systems for numbers.
Thank you. Liam, just a good headline. Do you want to come back on?
Well, we didn't hear. I mean, Julian might sort of tell us later whether he agrees with Ed Davey that cutting 9K fees is, quotes, stupid, unquotes. But maybe we'll tease that out over the course of this evening. Look, there is no higher education policy for this country worth its name unless we stop the system going bust. And right now, the system is going bust. And these aren't the views of Liam Byrne. These are the views of the Biz Select Committee. These are the views of the Higher Education Commission. These are the views of the Public Accounts Committee that says between 70 and 80 billion is going to be written off. And when you hear so many people involved in so many reports basically saying that the system is now approaching a financial tipping point, then it's time for people to wake up and take notice. Even David Willetts in the debate earlier on this year in the House said that it's inconceivable that the system can stay the same without some major tweaks either to the income repayment threshold or to the rate of interest. So the status quo is not an option. And the question for people who love and care about higher education in this election is who is going to put on the table a plan that Million Plus called for, which is, you know, a transparent and sustainable approach. Now, at the moment, the current system, because the levels of debt write-off are so high, is forecast to add £280 billion to national debt by 2030-31. Now, I've been in the Treasury, and let me tell you a secret. When the Treasury sees a write-off like that, it's going to find a way to get its money back. And so I know that there are many people in the higher education sector who would like the current system to stay, But I have to say to you, it would be criminally naive to ignore the time bomb that is about to go off, especially when the writing is on the wall. Just before one of our many half-terms that we have in this Parliament, under this government, there were some supplementary estimates that were slipped out. And in the small print of those estimates, it just added, you know, apropos nothing, that 4.1 billion was being added to the BIS budget in order to deal with the increases in debt write-off. So, you know, the current system is just not sustainable. The Treasury is going to get its money back one way or the other. And so the question is how are you going to deal with that? Now, the basic problem, as everybody here knows, is that the system is now so expensive that 3/4 of students will never pay their debt back. Now, this money may be theoretical to Vince Cable, but actually to the taxpayer, it's not theoretical, it's cash. And so the taxpayer has to step in and pick up the tab. And the taxpayer is just not going to be able to afford the system that is currently before us. So we've got to make some changes. And we argue that if you make the system more affordable, then you can make it more sustainable. So bringing the fee cap down from 9,000 to 6,000 is good for students because it makes it more affordable. It's good for universities because actually it's fully funded, and that's a deal that we propose to fix for the next Parliament. But crucially, it's a deal that is better for taxpayers because £40 billion will come off national debt by 2030, and about 13 to 14 billion will come off national debt over the course of the next Parliament. So you can't ignore your policies for the fee cap without looking at how you create a system that is capable of sustaining world-class universities in the years to come. And that is before you get into the business of whether you want to jeopardize our relationship with Europe, which adds about $1 billion a year to British science, whether you've got some kind of fiscal path that means taking 44% out of the business department after the election, whether you're going to persist with crazy immigration policies that are damaging our standing in international student markets. You know, we can debate all of that, but at the very core, you have got to get the basic question right of getting a sustainable system. Now, this actually gives you a big opportunity for how you fix the disincentives that the government loaded in to teach high-cost subjects. So most people here will know that there were some promises that were made about compensating people for teaching STEM, in particular high-cost engineering, that were basically ignored. Honoured in the breach, I think, would be a polite way of saying it. Now, if you have 2.7 billion coming through HEFKE to make good this teaching grant, UUK, we think, actually got its numbers wrong. I think in the UUK letter, it was estimated that it would cost 2 billion to bring fees down from 9,000 to 6,000. Actually, we think the safer estimate is 2.7 billion. But if HEFKE is delivering that money centrally, it allows you to look at how you fix the disincentive to currently teach high-cost recovery courses, high-cost courses, and that is something that we want to look at. We also think, by the way, that an investment on that scale allows you to continue with uncapping student numbers. As many people here know, for me, the argument is not just about sustainability and affordability, it's also about reform. Crucially, how do we bring further education and higher education closer together so that we revolutionise the number of earn while you learn degrees? Those people from FE who are here tonight will have laughed when Julian said that FE has been looked after. Those people dealing with a 25% cut to adult skills starting this September, those people who took the cut to 18-year-olds a year or two ago, certainly doesn't feel like FE has been protected. That's one of the reasons we've said that actually, if you think about a strong FE and a strong HE in the future, one of the decisions you've got to take is protecting the FE budget for 16 to 19 in real terms over the course of the next Parliament. I'm afraid that's not yet a commitment David Cameron has matched, but it's worth about 400 million to FE over the course of the next Parliament.
So a reduction for sustainability.
Unless the system is more sustainable, then I'm afraid the Treasury is going to find its ways of taking the money out. Or, and this is a challenge for Greg tonight, I suppose, you put fees up. At the moment, neither the Liberal Democrats or the Conservatives have said definitively that fees will not rise in the next Parliament. We've had what I think is called a politician's answer, where we've heard, I see no case for fees to rise. I guess I'm here to tell you tonight that is not the same as saying fees will not rise. Watch my lips.
So definitely not an attempt to court a young vote.
Actually, no, because the people who are most concerned about this, I mean, I've talked to thousands of young people about this over the last year, and the people who care most about this question are parents and grandparents, because they know that this generation has been, the young generation today, has been hammered by this government. This is the first generation for a century to be worse off than the generation that came before it. 1 in 6 are still out of work. Apprenticeships to the under-25s have fallen. and graduate from university with £44,000 worth of debt. If they want to buy a house, they'll need to save everything they earn for over 2 years just to get the deposit. How much harder are we going to make it for the generation that we need to rebuild our country? And the people who care most about that are parents and grandparents.
Thank you. Okay, Greg, that set you up.
Well, shall I answer the...
Why don't you answer the questions
from
the
the
audience?
And then I'll come,
yes. And then you can come
to Liam's point of view. But first of all, can I say it's great to be here. I've seen Nick Hillman in the front row. I knew how important this event was when I was appointed to this post, and I was walking down Downing Street, having been appointed by the Prime Minister. I turned my phone on. The first person to call was Nick Hillman. I assumed to congratulate me on this fantastic portfolio. Not a bit of it. It was to say, you will be coming to the happy Hustings, won't you, in the new year. So it's arrived. Let me deal with some of the points. First of all, postgraduate loans. And this is, as Julian says, I think this is a big step forward. We have some of the best universities in the world. We have some of the best teachers and some of the best research facilities in the world. And not to have support for people when they're doing courses above master's level, I think was unfinished business. And I think it's one of the things I spent most time on, and I was delighted that we were able to do it in the autumn statement. The question as to why a 30,000 cutoff. Well, we're about to publish the consultation on this, and I hope that people in the room will be able to respond to the consultation. As Julian says, there needs to be a cut-off somewhere for some of the reasons that he alluded to. What we will show, based on the evidence, is that there seems to be a difference between, broadly, people under 30 and over 30 in terms of their access to resources, empirically. That if you're over 30, you're more likely to have accumulated resources that might help you through a year. Obviously, if you're coming straight from an undergraduate degree, you're very unlikely to do that. But as I say, this is a question for consultation, and the idea that everyone with the ability to be able to benefit from a postgraduate taught course should do so, I think is very desirable. So do respond to that. In terms of the student number control, I very strongly believe that one of the major steps that we were able to make was to truly implement Robin's vision of having a place at university for everyone with the ability and the desire to go. And when you had a situation in which people were numerically controlled, you couldn't go to university, you couldn't count on that. I think that was Robin's being honoured not fully. And when you've got, I mean, Martha mentioned that I was born and bred in Middlesbrough. Very few people, a handful of people from my year at school went to university. And there's still much further to go. In Nottingham North, 16% of kids go to university. In Richmond upon Thames, 66% do. So when you've got such disparities still, I think to send a message that there is a place for you there at university, if you can get there, and we need to continue to do more to help people get there, I think is very important. In terms of the fee cap, I have to say I'm sorry that we have ended up with a disagreement about this, because I do think that the universities have benefited from the confidence and stability that's come from the fee system that we've had. I know some people didn't expect it from the outset, but the ability to have increased resources into teaching in universities by about 25% at a time when certainly it would have been squeezed with the rest of public expenditure, I think is a big achievement. The fact that we've managed to increase student numbers, including especially people from the most disadvantaged backgrounds, again, was something that wasn't necessarily predicted by its critics, but that has come to pass. So, and I think it's important that universities should benefit from confidence and stability going forward. And so my concern about Liam's proposal to reduce the fee cap is really three things. One is, if you've got about £3 billion that you're in effect increasing taxes to pay for, would you spend that, ideally, on graduates who are in their middle age at times of prosperity? For them, the IFS said it would benefit the highest half of graduates when they're in their 40s, when they at the most affluent. The IFS said that the people that benefit most are the very richest. So that, it seems to me, unprogressive to make that choice. The second thing is that to put universities back in a state of dependence on an annual haggle with the Treasury. And Liam's right, he's had experience with the Treasury. And in fact, he kind of alluded to it there, that actually it's not something that you ideally want to do, to have to go knocking on the door of the Treasury every year just to maintain your funding. As Liam had some experience of, they can run out of money from time to time. And I think the ability to count on this, rather than to have this annual haggle, which, and whatever you get, by the way, is going to come with lots of strings attached to it. So I think the independence and the confidence to plan ahead is important. And the third thing is that, even if Liam were right and all the money were forthcoming in the first year, at least, as again Liam alluded to. So what when you say, well, actually, we'd like to increase funding for research, we'd like to increase funding to widen participation for science. Once you've gone saying, well, actually, we need £3 billion just to reduce the debt of the highest earning graduates, then to make that case, say, by the way, we'd like to invest more in research, I think anyone can accept is going to reduce the case for that. So I'd hoped that cool heads might prevail, and Liam talked in the debate that we had about that Labour might have wanted to have a review. And that's what David Willetts was responding to. I think he was trying to make, trying to give you an opportunity there. But I'm sorry that hasn't happened. And all I would say in terms of the write-off that Liam says, if Liam is worried about the state having to write off a certain proportion of people's debts, then why write off 100% of the debt between 6,000 and 9,000? That is not even logical in its own terms, it seems to be. I think we've got a system in which
I'm going to stop you now, because I think you're straying into the longest possible answer territory, and actually I'm going to take a couple more questions. First of all, I'm going to take a question from Twitter, if we can do our incredible, clever, technical live link up from the front row. Do you want to read out just one question, I think?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm Chris Parr from Times Higher Education. We got a question on Twitter from Charlie Hasted. He says, if I'm prepared to take the debt on, why shouldn't I be allowed to get government funding for a second degree? Okay. And would you restore ELQ?
ELQ. And one more question from the audience. From over here, we haven't had anyone from this side. This lady had her hand up, waving frantically. Go for it.
Thank you. We've heard an awful lot about the price of higher education over the past few weeks, and indeed this evening, whether it should be £6,000 a year or the price of a posh cup of coffee per day. But I'm wondering if we could perhaps move away from price, and if there's room to actually talk about the value of higher education, and whether it's possible nowadays to see higher education as being about something other than just an individual financial investment.
Thank you. Great. Liam, do you want to start with the answers to those two?
I mean, I very much sympathise with and empathise with the point about value. I mean, in a world as complex as ours, the premium on critical citizens is higher than ever before, and there is no better training to be a critical citizen than a good university education. And it's why, I think a number of us are incredibly inspired by those campaigning for free education on campuses up and down the country. But I think we all know from the last election campaign that it is wise to make promises that you can't keep. And that's why, although we can't promise free education over the course of the next Parliament, we do think the right long-term shift is to a graduate tax. When I was the leader of Manchester Union, when I was there with Nick many, many years ago, we became one of the first student unions to go out in favour of a graduate tax. But the reason that we didn't say actually we would shift onto that into the next Parliament is we weren't sure that we could deliver it. And despite many of the the careful and well-judged points that Greg makes tonight, we just can't get away from the fact that the system's going bust. And if we want good, strong universities in the years to come, they need to be built on rock and not on sand. And that means the funding system has got to change. ELQ is a good issue to follow that answer with, really, because, while I have huge sympathy to the argument that is made, it's just not something that we can yet see the money for. Now, it has to be said that it is easier to foresee the circumstances where that could be funded because we have a very different fiscal outlook to the Conservatives. So the Conservatives are proposing to balance not just current spending but capital spending as well by 2017-18. They want all of that money to come out of spending cuts. That means 55 billion of public spending cuts in the course of the next Parliament. That isn't a fiscal path that we've committed to. So the truth is that we have an awful lot more wiggle room to fix problems like ELQ.
Thank you. Julian?
Firstly, on the ELQ, I absolutely take the point, and I think it is a shame when people are deprived of the chance to study, particularly when I see a number of cases where people have started degrees and then run into problems, they fall out, often through illness or something like that, and they have difficulty being able to finish the rest of the degree. I think there's a lot that we could do to try to make that easier for people to study. You don't necessarily want to encourage people to be perpetual students. That might be overfunding it from us, but I think we could do a lot more there. The point about value of HE, I think, is absolutely right. What is the point of the whole thing? And we've had, over the years, a whole series of discussions. Do you measure success by the average income of graduates? Do you measure it by starting income of graduates? There's been a whole lot of different measures like that, all of which, in my view, are completely wrong. Because the real success of any education, to me, is not about what happens immediately. It's something to do with how happy are people with their lives when they're 50. It's that much longer-term vision. Does it set you up so that you can achieve what you wish to achieve? Whether that's a high-paying job, whether that's a creative arts role, whether it's, whatever it might be, that is there. So that means also having much broader subjects, actually, so that people learn some more life skills. They learn how science and arts interact, so they could learn things that they'll be used the whole time. That would be a much nicer way to measure what the value of HE is. It's much, much more than simply the return to the economy or the return to the individual or the return to an employer. And just, to come back on this whole issue about fees, Liam is fond of pointing out the fact that we didn't manage to deliver our promise. He doesn't quite admit why Labour failed to deliver on their promises either of the last two times when they made promises, or indeed why Ed Miliband, who promised to have a graduate tax back in June 2010 when he was going for leader, now hasn't done so.
Well, no, I still think it's the right long-term answer.
Well, what he said was in a few months he'll publish the plans, and 5 years later we're still waiting. But I think the key thing is not to get out there looking for those headlines. It is about, as you were saying, the problem with the fees is the parents who are concerned about it, quite understandably. One of the reasons I voted against the 9K rise was because I was concerned about the psychology. It hasn't driven people off. Greg's right to say more people are going, particularly, at least more full-time people. Not part-time, absolutely. Part-time is another issue, but we're getting more people from disadvantaged backgrounds than I thought would be possible. But students are being forced to drop out. Students are having problems because they cannot afford the living costs. Anglia-Ruskin Student Union, their big campaign at the moment is for support for the living costs there because they don't get as much as the London allowance. That's what they need help. Cambridge University Student Union, just having an election at the moment, that is where they say they need help. That is where we should give help. We should be giving money there to help.
What will be in the Lib Dem manifesto?
You'll have to wait and see it, Liam.
Oh, we'll come back to that. Greg, I have to say that you've been accused of filibustering on Twitter, so you need to keep this really snappy to get your reputation back intact.
I will try and keep it short. On ELQ, look, it follows from everything that I said, and what I said on postgraduate, loans, that I want to see more people going into education, and some people that have done a first degree and would like to do a further one, either in a different subject. Of course, that would be wonderful to do, but we do live in constrained finances, as Liam says, so I can't commit to being able to expand that. But it does lead me to say that, you know, again, if you had money to invest, to spare, wouldn't that be something that could be contemplated rather than taking £8,000 off the repayment of the top 1% of graduate earners, for example? But on the value of a university education, I mean, you know, probably like most people in this room, education totally transformed my life. It opened doors that would be closed to me without, and its principal impact on me is far beyond
I'm not sure this is answering the question.
The economic. Well, it's about the value of a degree, isn't it? And I think the principal value of an education, it seems to me, is what it does, not just for the individuals, but also for our society. I think a better educated society is a stronger society. It is one that actually competes internationally, culturally, as well as economically. And I completely agree with you that it shouldn't just be an argument about economics. It should be an argument about culture and society as well. Sorry, I hope that's shorter.
Any question on any answer on the ELQ?
I mentioned that.
Sorry, I missed it. Right. Because this is such an important topic, we're going to take one more question, but then we really need to move on. So I'm going to go with this section of the room because we haven't had one of the man here in the red shirt, but this is the last question, so make it punchy, please.
I will do. I'd like to ask the whole panel. I think there's a danger that we're going to get sidetracked by the tuition fee amount itself. Going back to Lord Brown's review in 2009, that was supposed to deliver an affordable and sustainable higher education system. Labour went for the £6,000 fee cap, rising to £9,000 in exceptional circumstances, provided a satisfactory WP agenda was in place. All universities are charging £9,000 for most, if not their courses. I think the reality is that you're right. I think at that fee...
What's your question? Can you get to your question?
I will, yeah. 75% you're suggesting is the figure of students who won't repay. I think at the time, even at £6,000, you were looking at 40% of students would never repay their loan. So my question, I commend Labour for actually saying that that is a problem. It is a large problem, but what would all the panel suggest is the answer to the significant problem of the ever-increasing debt? You talked about slowing the debt by reducing the fee cap to £6,000. You're not actually tackling the debt by doing that.
So how do we tackle the debt? Greg, you first.
Well, I think we've got a system that is working. It's allowing more students to go to university than ever before, especially from disadvantaged backgrounds. It's giving universities more teaching income than they otherwise would have. But it's good for the country as well. We need to have more students. We wouldn't have been able to take off the cap on student numbers without the reforms that we've been able to make. But don't take my word for it. I mean, the OECD are a pretty respected organisation. They don't have much of an axe to grind. And what they have said very clearly is that the UK is one of the countries, and I'm quoting from them, that have figured out a sustainable approach to higher education finance, and the investments pay off for individuals and taxpayers. I think we should keep faith with that.
So you're not worried about the debt?
No, I think it's a good investment, as the OECD say, for taxpayers.
Julian?
I think the thing is the fact that many people don't pay it all back is the bit that makes it more progressive than it would be otherwise. That's the bit that means that a student who then goes on to earn less doesn't pay as much. I mean, I have to say that seems to me like a good thing. In fact, what we really have at the moment is very similar to a capped graduate tax. You know, and it's so the cap changes the ratio, but the fact is it's a graduate tax until you've paid it off. So yes, there is that debt, but it's not a classic debt in the normal sense. So I actually think the fact that we moved as a government from 15,000 to 21,000 helped students a huge amount. That was the good bit, one of the good bits of the package. The move up to 9 is the more challenging bit. But that bit means that students who will earn £20,000 increasing with inflation don't pay. They need that money. They'll have other benefits from income tax thresholds going up and so forth. That is a good thing, that somebody who earns 50,000 will pay more than them. That is a good feature. So I don't see it as a major bug in the system that some people never pay it off. I think one thing that would be interesting to do, if there is the 2.9...
One very quick thing that would be interesting.
If there is the 2.9 billion to either reduce fees from 9,000 to 6,000 or to give bursaries, what if we had a system where we offered students the choice of which one they wanted? Would they like 3,000 off their fees, or would they like 1,500 a year to spend on their living expenses? That'd be a fascinating real-life experiment to see what students actually wanted to do.
Okay, great. Great. Can we just get Liam's quick answer?
Listen, this is not about fascinating experiments. It's what goes into the party's manifestos at the next election. And what people here and people who love higher education need to focus on is what is in the black and white in those manifestos. The system's going bust. That's not my view. It's the Public Accounts Committee, it's the Biz Select Committee, and it's the Higher Education Commission. If the system goes bust, there ain't going to be good, high-quality universities in the future, especially if your fiscal path involves taking 44% out of the biz budget after the election. So I'm afraid there is a nettle here that has got to be grasped, and our message is simple. If you make the system more affordable, then the system will be more sustainable. It is as simple as that.
Okay, great. We're going to throw a curveball in at this point. I realise I let these guys talk quite a lot in this particular section, so you're going to be able to retort now. Wave your cards in the air, the person that you think had the most consistently good answers for that particular section of the debate. Right. Red. Liam, I think that might have been because you were pretty snappy. I'm not sure how much of a judgment it was on your policies. I'll leave the audience to decide. But red, pretty clear winner there. That's just a first-time signal. Now we're going to move on to the other very uncontentious issue of immigration and international students. So I feel like we're moving from the frying pan into the fire. We're going to take, again, 3 questions and then ask each of the panelists to respond. So please, the lady at the back, you were very quick up. You definitely get the microphone first.
The acquisition and indeed the retention of the best and brightest overseas students is clearly good for British business. The Institute of Directors has rightly spoken out on the debacle that is involving international students in targets to reduce immigration.
Okie dokie, but could you get to the question?
What is the panel's view, therefore, on this particular issue for British business?
For business. Great. Next question, this gentleman over here at the back. Thank you.
Mark Allenson from Edge Hill. Which of the parties is going to change the tone from an unwelcoming, intolerant society to one where red tape, the crass red tape that's in place, is cut and post-study work visas are reintroduced?
Great. And then this gentleman here at the front. Speed of arms in the air was what won that one.
Would you back an international student growth strategy with cash?
Great. 3 great questions. Liam, why don't you kick off?
I have a very simple 5-word answer on which is my headline, which is take students out of the target. Students shouldn't be in the net migration target. They need taking out and putting students in that target. Putting students in that target has been one of the biggest setbacks for British soft power over the course of this Parliament. But second, we now have to do something more, which is that we have to look again at the way the post-study work visa works. And you'll forgive me, I feel very strongly about it, because when I brought in the point system as Immigration Minister, I went to enormous lengths to get the post-study work visa regime right, so that students could extend their visas by 2 years, then add another 3, taking them to 5 years, allowing them to get indefinite leave to remain. I thought that that was a good way of encouraging British businesses to make the investment in hiring foreign students. I thought that those students wouldn't necessarily make their lifelong home in the UK, but they would go back to a different country around the world, therefore thereby helping strengthen British trade links in the years to come. And so whatever the final, I don't know who's going to write the policy, I don't know whether it will be Theresa May or George Osborne or Greg who gets to write the policy of the Conservative Party on this. I pray that it's Greg, quite frankly. But when you look, as I often do, at the front page of the Times of India, and you see the headlines that were splashed over papers like the Times of India through the debacle of jeopardising or questioning or threatening to restructure again the post-study work visa, your heart sinks. So we have got to, I think, bring back a post-study work visa. I'm not saying the one I sort of put in place is perfect. I'm sure there are lessons that we can learn. But we've got to conduct an urgent review, Home Office and BIS working hand in hand together. And I'm afraid,
Okay, can you move on to the next question?
The last question is now so important, because the truth is the damage that's been done to Britain's reputation globally is now so big that we need something like a Prime Minister's Initiative Mark III, and we do need to back that with cash. And quite frankly, it's going to take all hands to the pump. It is going to take the Royal Societies, the other learned societies working together with government and our embassy network overseas. Because, you know, this is something that we can be brilliant at. We are brilliant at this, but we can do so, so much better. And if we want to educate global citizens here at home, then there is nothing better than putting them into a classroom or a lecture hall or a lab with citizens that are here from around the world.
So, Julian, would you take the figure out of the net migration?
Well, I think it's absurd that we count students within those figures. I mean, students are completely different. Select committee after select committee after select committee has said they should be taken out. But actually, I would have to say the only bit on that I think I disagree with Liam. I don't think we should have a target for net migration anyway. I think it is a fundamentally flawed approach. And we've seen the complete failure. I mean, this is something the Tories insisted on. We never thought it was a good idea. And it is a very damaging thing, particularly because the only way to make sure you hit a net migration target is to make sure that enough Britons leave the country. And you can only really achieve that by making sure you mess the economy up. That is not a successful strategy to sort out your immigration issue. And we benefit as a country from migration. And we should be very, very proud to say that, very, very clear to say that.
Back down to the question around business and
so we absolutely should take them out. I talk to businesses regularly, and it's about students coming here, the best and the brightest. It's about students studying here, and they're going off to run companies elsewhere and trading with us, or to run countries overseas and trading with us. The benefits are massive. It's also massive after people have finished, later on in their careers, and we should be much, much more open. We should definitely bring back post-study work. It's something we've committed to already. And I think we should have an international student growth strategy, and there should be cash with it, partly because it's one of our great export markets. We do very, very well as a country from international education. It's billions of pounds a year. We would put money into a strategy for any other export market. Why not that one? In terms of the issue about tone, I think that's a really serious issue. And the most damaging thing, I think, about UKIP is that it's opened up a window for far more xenophobic and intolerant speech. That's what it's done to the debate. And we've seen the Conservatives follow down that route. We've seen Labour follow down that route, putting out lots of leaflets about their tough new approach on migration. And that is really damaging this country and this country's reputation. We should be positive about migration. We should be positive about people who come here and contribute to our society, whether they're students or whether they're not students. The tone has to be welcoming.
Greg.
I'd like to see more overseas students. I would like us to be the world's leading destination for overseas students. We're second to the US at the moment. Actually, although there has been a pretty vigorous debate around this in recent years, the numbers have been going up. People sometimes are not aware of this. In fact, the current round of applications to UCAS, as well as the last round of admissions, there were more overseas students admitted to the UK than ever before. I think that is a fantastic thing. I'd like it to go further. I'd like to overtake the US. In terms of the policy, there is not and there will not be a cap on overseas students. Quite the reverse. We want to see more of them. Not only.
Will you take it out of the migration?
Well, let me tell you why I can't commit to that. Because it's an international definition of who is and who isn't a migrant. The policy that bites, if you like, is whether there is a limit, and there isn't a limit. And my ambition is to continue to increase that number. What can we do about getting the message out and the tone around this? Well, actually, Nicola Dandridge in the front row, and I had the pleasure of being with the President of Mexico earlier this afternoon, signing an agreement such that the UK universities' qualifications will be recognized in Mexico for the express purpose of making it easier for more Mexican students to come and study in the UK. We should take more opportunities to do that. India is the place with Pakistan where there has been a problem in recent years. I and my colleagues have been assiduous in going and explaining that there is the warmest of welcomes available to Indian students, Pakistani students coming here. We need to continue to do that. We also need to solve some of the administrative problems that do occur from time to time. I think as Julian and Liam said, I've established a group that meets regularly with the Indian High Commissioner to consider particular examples of problems with the system so that we can put them right.
So
but
would you say that you're in complete allegiance with your Home Office and your Treasury colleagues on this point? Because I'm confused that the room seems to think that there is an issue with the number, and yet you seem to give us the impression there isn't. And Julian, did you want to?
Well, the facts are the facts, and I think everyone in this room, or not everyone, but most people will be empiricists, I'm sure. And the truth is that the numbers are growing, and I know that's not the perception, but they are growing, and they should grow more. And as Liam says, he's heard me say this before, I want to see that number grow, and I'm very clear about that.
Greg, I mean, I keep hearing from you and from Home Office ministers that you can't take students out because there's an international definition. Why can't you just publish two numbers then? One with students, one without students, so that we can all focus on the one without students?
Well, they are published, so otherwise we wouldn't be able to know that there is an increasing number of overseas students.
Right. We're going to...
But you focus on the wrong one.
We're going to draw that to the close now. We get to the sense of the answers. Can we have a question from Twitter?
It's a question from Tom Koek. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He points out for each new UK master's student, there are 3 non-UK. I think he's referring to hefty figures that show that taught master's courses.
Sorry, so for each master's student?
For each taught master's student in the UK, there are 3 non-UK for each UK student. Okay. Do you think there's a need to get a greater proportion coming from the UK, or is that not a concern?
Okay. Yeah. Julian, can you take that?
Yeah, I mean, so there are a lot of international students. That's because it's a great export market. That's why it brings in over £10 billion altogether into our system. International students are the people who are funding many of the courses which we then offer to other people. So we need to take steps like the postgraduate funding we were talking about earlier to make sure that Britons can afford to go and do postgraduate study. But the fact that we're so successful in bringing people in from overseas is a fantastic thing.
Liam?
So we do need to increase the number of British students on master's programmes, and I think Greg took an important step forward with postgraduate loans. The challenge, though, is that the repayment regime is simultaneous rather than consecutive. So the risk is that graduates will come off a master's programme straight into an upper income tax bracket because they're paying basic rate tax, national insurance, and then undergraduate loan repayment contribution, and then postgraduate loan contribution. That basically takes them into an upper income tax bracket, and that's a problem. And the reason that I think the Treasury has demanded that is because the RAB charge, the debt write-off charge, is getting on for 50% now. And so this is another example. If you can bring down the debt write-off level quite substantially, then you can begin looking at how you can actually just let students pay back one loan and then pay back the second loan. And these are just some of the important changes that we've got to look at, including actually allowing students over the age of 30 to go and access this loan program in order to study at postgrad 2. But there can't be an answer to this until you bring down radically the level of debt write-off, and that's what Labour's proposing.
Thank you. So how many people in the room actually work in research? We're going to move on to research as a topic now. So I'm just interested how many people here work in research part of the sector. Let's have some questions about your areas of the world. Some very quick hand up there. Thank you. And another
Dennis Hayes, Academics for Academic Freedom. In the recent spiked free speech university rankings, they ranked 80% of universities as having a chilling effect on freedom of speech or actively censoring various opinions and views and individuals. Freedom of speech is fundamental to freedom of inquiry and to freedom of research. And I'd like to know from every panel member what they're going to do to ensure that freedom of speech is upheld in universities. We have universities banning Israeli academics. We have a calls for combating radicalism, but unless you have freedom of speech and actually debate and argue, you're going to lose all those battles. Battle against radicalisation, whatever, however you see that, and also, just last point, increase the climate of anti-Semitism through bans on Israeli academics that's already rife in British university.
All right, thank you. Another question? Over here, man at the front. Thank you.
Will you maintain the dual funding system for research in the next Parliament, and will you continue funding for arts, humanities and social sciences?
Thank you. And one more question. Anyone on? Oh, sorry, missed you right next door. Thank you.
James Wilson, Campaign for Social Science. What more could be done to support cross-disciplinary research, and specifically what do you hope to come out of the nurse review of the research councils?
Yeah, excellent.
Great. Greg, would you like to start?
Sure. Of course, universities have to be bastions of free speech, and there certainly should be no discrimination against Israeli academics. One of the things that we've done when putting together the legislation that's recently gone through the House is to be very clear that the duty of universities to promote and protect freedom of speech should always be very clear in everyone's minds, and that is I think the accepted standard that everyone wants to apply. When it comes to the dual funding system for research, those of you in the research community will know that we published a science and innovation strategy at the end of last year. One of the principles of that strategy was that if we are to look forward 10 years, we need at all costs to build on our reputation for excellence. And in my view, excellence comes from some of our arrangements institutions, including the dual funding system for research, whereby you can fund through peer review excellent projects and programs, but you can also recognize excellent institutions in the medium and longer term. So it is absolutely central to our excellence and will continue. James's question on, and by the way, for the other part of the question was whether arts, humanities and social sciences are included in that. Absolutely. The contribution that all of these disciplines make to our universities, to our learning, to our society are absolutely essential, and leads on to the next question. Some of the opportunities for closer interdisciplinary collaboration between separate disciplines increase all the time. I mean, I give an example of that. I meet regularly with the chief scientific advisors across government, and in the tackling of Ebola, one of the main contributions has come from the social anthropologists whose research on societal norms in handling dead bodies has been one of the major contributors to the success that is being enjoyed in eradicating that. But there are all sorts of areas in which that is the case. So again, one of the themes of the science and innovation strategy is collaboration. Whether it's between disciplines, whether it's between institutions, whether it's between nations, science and the arts and social sciences and humanities know no boundaries. We should be fitting ourselves for that, and that's one of the reasons that Sir Paul Nurse I asked to lead a review with the research councils to look at how our arrangements can make sure that we are taking advantage of all of the opportunities to do that in the years ahead.
So you would continue to fund equally social sciences, humanities and science?
Yeah, my view is that we should recognize the important contribution of each of them. I know that's not entirely without controversy. The Science and Technology Committee of the House of Commons upbraided me for including humanities and the social sciences in what I regard as a science in the broad Wissenschaft, German definition of it. But I do so completely unapologetically.
Thank you. Julian.
Well, firstly, to pick up the issue about free speech. I mean, free speech is absolutely essential, and I think there is too much of a trend to no platforming people because people don't like something they believe, something they say. And we had a, to my mind, very embarrassing incident recently where Nigel Farage was supposed to be giving a talk at Cambridge, and there was a really strong reaction that he should not be allowed to give that speech. And I dislike pretty much everything he stands for, but I think he should be allowed to speak, and other people should be allowed to disagree with him. And I think there's been some really unpleasant attitudes there, which get across the message people should not say things that we don't like. And that is completely unacceptable throughout society, frankly, but particularly at universities, which have to be a bastion of free speech for that. People don't have to go and listen. They're allowed not to listen, but they shouldn't try and stop it. And it also doesn't work. If you want to counter radicalization, silencing radicals isn't the most effective way. It just means people hear it underground. What you need is counter-narrative. The Quilliam Foundation, for example, has been doing a lot of work on this. Provide people with other messages so that they can think and hear different things rather than only one issue. And we fought in the counter-terror bill to make sure there was more priority for free speech, but there's definitely more to do. Dual funding, yes, absolutely, for all the reasons outlined. You do need to do that, partly because you need some base funding that's not dependent on good projects, because some people need to start things off before they get research grants. Once you're going in the system, I remember talking to somebody because I used to be an academic applying for these, they said, what you work on a research grant, but actually you've done half the work already and use the second half of it to apply for the next grant. That only works once you've started. So definitely do that. And yes, of course you should support arts and humanities, interdisciplinary, wherever it is. I think it's a shame that we still have this very divided culture. And it goes back to choices at 16, where people go on one side of the divide or the other side of the divide. And that's deeply damaging because most things want to cross over. I've been trying to get more money in overall for this whole research package. It's something I published in a paper several years ago for research. I've been trying to get agreement for a 15-year plan for a 3% above inflation increase in a ring-fenced budget. I have so far completely and utterly failed to get either of the other parties to agree to it. But I think you do have to hand for that longevity. And also, yes, we've had tight economic times, but we know that investment in research pays back money. We have to build wealth in the society, not just work out what we'll do with the wealth that's already there. And the cross-disciplinary research, yes, we should definitely make it much easier. I encountered all sorts of barriers between research councils where BBSRC would shunt me to EPSRC and back again, and that doesn't work. And it's a huge shame because I think the most interesting research is almost always done at the boundary between two subjects. Whatever two subjects they are, whether they're both sciences, both humanities, one of each, whatever, that's where the most exciting new things are done. So we need to find ways to make sure that that can happen, which is both about facilitating arrangements for it, but also to make it easier for people to speak the languages of the other sector, because there can be some really interesting language issues where people find it very hard to talk about the same things together.
Thank you. Finally, Liam.
Well, I think much agreement. I mean, I too think that universities have got to be bastions of free speech and free research. I don't think universities should step out of what is a collective responsibility on all of us to combat radicalisation. Therefore, the balance has got to be struck, and that's why it was important that we did ask for additional safeguards over the way that new guidance on prevent, for example, will be implemented. We're waiting to see, I think, the final edition of that. But I think Julian is right to say that in a free society, the best way of dealing with bad people is not silencing them, it's exposing them. And that's something that universities, I think, can do well.
But I'm not clear, actually, from any of you whether that's a policy point. Do you embed that in policy?
I think part of the challenge with this is that we are awaiting new guidance from the government on how the prevent agenda can be implemented in universities. I think there was widespread dissatisfaction with the first edition that went too far. The safeguards and oversight were lacking. And this, I think, is one where the devil's in the detail, and we do need a better product, a better edition from the government. Dual system, like the others, agree it's a good thing. I mean, I would add that I think we need a long-term framework for revenue funding as well as for capital funding. I think we're now at the end of sort of 5 years of ministerial shiny project syndrome. There is I'm afraid, a risk that there is some kit that we're now investing in where we won't necessarily be able to keep the lights on because actually the revenue side has not been sorted out. And I think this takes me to, I think, what I hope we'll see out of the nurse review, because I think that we do need to restore the dignity of social science in public policy making. I think there's a very strong case for a chief social scientist in government. I think that there's a very strong case for proper independent appointment of a chief scientist, even at the Treasury. It's certainly bad when I think the Department for Business doesn't have its own chief scientist in place for, I think, 5 months over the course of this Parliament, and other departments where science is important, like, for example, DEFRA, had a chief scientist absent for even longer. That's a bad thing. But I think one of the most exciting opportunities for science over the next 5 to 10 years is this extraordinary new fusion between science and arts, between professional, technical, and academic. And I don't think at the moment that we've got a very good structure for deciding either research priorities or for funding allocation between research councils. I think we've got some good ways now, beginning with Harold Wilson back in the 60s, for putting science into policy. I don't think we have an especially rational way for putting policy into science. And so if you look at the money that's spent between research councils, as a proportion, it's been pretty much stable for decades. Now, maybe that's the right answer, but I think...
Would you keep the science ring fence around the funding?
Well, I think we need a rational process for deciding that, actually, because I think in terms of getting the division right and the research priorities right between research councils, we don't have a rational, transparent way for politicians and scientists coming together to decide that. And that's why I sort of smiled slightly when Greg alluded to the risks of scientists having to come cap in hand to politicians for money, because if you're bidding for research capital, I'm afraid that's what happens at the moment. And at the moment, it's not a terribly transparent process, as the last funding round happened to prove. So we think that the ring fences on the money should stay. We think there's a strong case for a ring fence on the revenue side as well as the capital side. But I hope that one of the things that the nurse review might be able to tell us is what is a better way for actually bringing together at the appropriate level of detail politicians who are interested in the long-term direction of policy and scientists, so that priorities between research councils can be judged in a much more transparent way than at the moment, because I'm afraid at the moment it is all still a bit in the dark.
I just want to respond to the point that Liam made quite rightly on making sure that projects can be maintained in the future, not just new ones. Actually, in the science capital budget that we allocated with the strategy, we put aside a fund for world-class labs precisely to be able to ensure that you don't just open something and then forget about it. And of course, having put that in the strategy, we're very clear about that. And so when it comes to revenue, the same principles will be followed. And that's quite right.
Okay, thank you. Right. Time has raced by. We are the #1 trending topic in the UK on Twitter, which I'm sure is making you all feel extremely excited. We've just got time for the last chunk of questions, which are, I think, often the most important: social mobility and access. Lady in the front, I promise you can ask a question. You look like you might explode if you don't. It's a dangerous health and safety issue. Please ask your question.
Hi, my name's...
Make it a really snappy question.
My name's Simone Aspis from the Alliance for Inclusive Education, disabled student, 10 years, recipient of Disabled Students Allowance. The government's Disabled Students Allowance reforms are going on trial underneath judicial review. What will each of the political parties do in terms of retaining the Disabled Students Allowance policy as it is? Yep. And in terms of a wider question, what is your policies regards to in terms of improving disabled students' access to higher education under all of your duties underneath the UN Convention, Persons with Disabilities, Article 24?
Great question, worth waving your hands in the air for.
And we're also supporting a judicial review as well.
All right. Thank you. Gentleman behind you.
Martin Dole from the Association of Colleges. The OECD has remarked on the fact that England is an outlier in having a lack of short cycle, HE, shorter full honours degrees, and there's been a fall off in this last Parliament in mature and flexible study. Is this important? If it is, what do you intend to do about it?
Thank you. And the lady over here in the green scarf.
Trisha King from Birkbeck, just to pick up on that question. You would think that universities now are about 18-year-old full-time students, and the biggest downturn has been in part-time. And what will the panel do? There seems to be no policy to address that, and yet what we've experienced is market failure in part-time higher education. No party seems to have any policy to do anything about it. Please, can you?
Yeah. Great question. Great. Thank you very much. Greg, if you can start, and I'd like to add my voice to the part-time students question, which I know is very naughty as a neutral chair, but obviously this impacts the Open University, and it's somewhat frustrating that everyone talks about numbers going up, but actually, if you look at the part-time students, numbers are going down.
Let me start with Disabled Students Allowance and come to that. Our intention, my intention on disabled students is that they should have absolutely the same ability to avail themselves of a good university education as anyone else in society. It is absolutely essential we widen participation. This absolutely includes disabled students. When I came in, you'll know that I paused the proposals that had been put out there, and I think we need to get it right. I don't want to do anything that would put off a single disabled student from going to university. Quite the reverse. I think there is a challenge for universities, if I might say so, who do have a duty under the law to make reasonable adjustments, just as any other employer has to make sure that their premises are available, are accessible to disabled students. And so they should proceed with those adjustments. They shouldn't be exempted from that. But I am determined that we're going to get it right on disabled students' allowance, and what we must do must give confidence to every disabled student in the country that there is a place at university for them.
So if you won next session, what would be the difference in policy?
Well, we're consulting on the proposals that are being put forward. I can't when we're consulting on that, but what I think people have recognised is that I have not proceeded with the proposals that were introduced. I want to work consensually with disabled students and their representative groups to get it right. There is no difference between me and disabled students and their representatives in terms of maximising access, and I'm determined that we will do that in a consensual way that maximises their ability to go. In terms of part-time students and as Martin says, short form and flexible degrees. I mean, first of all, it is, I do acknowledge that whilst we've made great progress on growing student numbers generally, there has been a shrinkage in the number of part-time students. As a former employee of the Open University, you can imagine that that's not something that I welcome. I think most people acknowledge that there are a number of different causes here, and it's not as well understood as it should be. We do know that, for example, as the number of full-time students has expanded, that may have been a factor that squeezed the number of part-time students. But I will be the first to acknowledge that I don't think we know all of the answers to that. What I have established in the department is a review to look at what the causes and what the prospective solutions to this are. When it comes to Martin's part of the analysis of short form and flexible degrees. There is, I think, a lot to be said about that, and a lot more to be done about it. And if I can say, if you watch this space in the weeks ahead, we may have some more proposals to share on that.
Liam.
Well, I hope that's true. It better be good, because a 55,000 fall in the number of part-time students is not good for Britain, and it's not good for those students. The government set a target this year of growing student numbers by about 60,000, and it's currently on course to miss that ambition by about 80%. Now, what that means is that there is a huge amount of unspent provision that is still in the public sector net cash, the loan budgets for the rest of the next Parliament. And we began this debate tonight by talking about priorities for change. Our view is that the growth in higher education in the years to come should be around earn-while-you-learn degree places. It's crazy that only 2% of apprentices in this country go on to degree-level skills. And what I think we've got to do is build what I've called a British dual-track system, where it's possible to take an academic route up to a degree level of skill, but it's also possible to take a professional and technical path up to a degree level of skill too. Now, if you want to do that, you've got to make some changes. You've got to make some changes in schools. You've got to inflation protect the further education budget. You've got to bring online about 80,000 more apprenticeships at level 3. And crucially, you've got to stop the system that forces FE and HE to compete instead of collaborate. What we need is not just a country of world-class institutions, but a country where there's a world-class system, where we join FE and HE back together again. Now, what that could mean, I think, is a radical increase, actually, in the number of the kinds of courses that Martin has talked about that are delivered in further education settings. But I would see that as a springboard, very often, into going on to study further in a higher education setting, a bit like the American community college partnership model that has worked so successfully for so long. But if you're to do that, you've got to kind of drop this kind of laissez-faire culture that so bedevils our higher education system, where you have a kind of system where nearly £1 billion of publicly backed loan support is now going to students at private universities that don't have the same kind of quality oversight as good old-fashioned public universities and public colleges, then I'm afraid you haven't got the conditions for knitting back together the kind of system that I'm talking about. Now, we designed this sort of system for the Germans 60 or 70 years ago. Since we've done them quite well, I think it's time that we built the same kind of system here in Britain. Now, I think that if you've got a system like that, where it's possible to rise either through an academic track or a professional and technical track, you can create a system that is much better for disabled students. And we will not live in a socially mobile country, and we will not live in a meritocracy in this country until we radically improve the prospects for disabled students. Now, I don't think that we should get rid of disabled students allowance unless we can prove and show that something that is better is going to take its place. And my own stab at what should take its place is a much grittier, much stronger, much more enforceable set of rights for disabled students that don't just steer and help a university or a college understand what they should be entitled to and should be delivering, but would also help a court decide whether a student actually had the rights that they should have genuinely delivered. I think that kind of student charter-based approach that NUS and others have called for is a good idea, and I think it would be a positive step forward for disabled students in this country.
Great. So, Julian, we've got some exciting policy announcements that we haven't yet been able to have revealed to us from Greg. We've got the joining of FE and HE from Liam. What are the Lib Dems going to offer us?
Whole range of it. But firstly on DSA, I mean, I'm quite passionate about this, not necessarily quite as passionate as you are. And when we had the original proposals from David Willits, I secured the debate in Parliament that basically said this is not acceptable. I worked with my two student unions in Cambridge and NUS. And we had a really productive debate where from all sides of the chamber people explained it was simply not workable. It was far too fast, it was going far too far, it would do far too much harm, because we have to make sure that people are not precluded from education because of their disability. That has to be an absolutely clear point. And I have to say, Greg did, when he came in, he took the opportunity, I think, to listen in a way that it was harder for David to do, to make the changes. Now, yes, there should be reasonable adaptations on universities. Of course there should be. Universities should try to make things easier in a whole lot of different ways. But they cannot, the government can't just simply say, universities make it happen. There has to be a lot more work to help with what it can be, with making sure that there still is the right support, which I think incidentally does mean improving the type of support that you have. If you talk to dyslexics, actually the provision there is at the moment is not necessarily the best provision there could be for them, so there's much, much more that we can do. On part-time courses, mature courses, flexible courses, and there's some overlap to that. Yes, we definitely have to do a lot more about that, because it is a great shame that we've seen that decline. It's interesting that we see it, because actually it used to be that many part-time students had to start paying their fees back while they were still studying. And you might think that ending that process would encourage people to be part-time students, and it hasn't been. I don't really understand why. One of the things that we would definitely do is to substantially increase the Access to Learning Fund, because we'd like to get that to at least 50 million and get universities to get involved as well, so that there is much more funding available to try to make sure it is easier for part-time students there. I think the other thing, and HEPI's done some really interesting work on this, is to make sure that things are more transferable, whether it's between HE and FE, or whether it's between HE colleges, HE themselves. I think HEPI had the idea of a personal learning cloud. And I think the idea that your learning follows you and you can do bits in different places, is a really interesting one, which will fit quite well with the development of MOOCs and needs to be taken a lot further so that people can have the education that suits them far more.
Feels
the
a
OU,
little bit like the Open University.
I was about to
no
say,
bias.
I was about to say the OU does that fantastic one and it's really done some really nice stuff on MOOCs, but it's not just about the OU either.
Okay. We'll take the message back to Vince.
I think it's Greg who's in charge of that. So.
You've all...
You'd have thought.
We'll take the message back to Vince. Well, I'm sure you've all got a lot out of this evening. I can safely say I do not want David Dimbleby's job, but I hope that you've had some answers to some of your questions. Can we just finish off with where we started? Will you wave your cards in the air for the colour of the party who you think answered the questions best this evening? Answered the questions best. Oh, Liam, if it was a general election, Liam would have had a landslide. No, everyone has to put their card up, abstention vote, and then please, who you think will win the election? Has it changed? A few more blues going up, Greg, slightly, still a coalition,
Still a
few more
coalition.
blows. Well, I don't know, it's hard to, I'd have said coalition, that's what I'd call that one. All right, thank you very much indeed, and onwards into the election. Thank you.
Good.